Wednesday night rugby on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. Team of us. Everyone in.
Now, we have lots to discuss this Wednesday evening. Keith Wood and Rory O'Connor of the Irish Independent are with us. Gents, Happy New Year to you both.
Many happy returns.
Great to have you with us. Keith, slightly scary backdrop, listening to the news all day. That is where we find ourselves early once again in 2021.
Yeah, I think the difficulty for everybody is when the hope is almost the most difficult part, where when conversations happen with the vaccine, you think, well, that's going to be great. That means all their problems will be solved, but the logistics and the run out of that are very difficult, and the escalation in the amount of cases makes it incredibly difficult. So it's tough. We're almost going back to what we said 9 months ago. Stay home, stay safe.
Yeah, very much so. And we'll get on to the ramifications for rugby on that front in just a moment. But Rory, to matters at hand, we bemoan the lack of competition in the Pro 14, often with good reason. But Connacht's win at the RDS, well, it's injected some life into proceedings. Conference A, at least, this is a COVID-shortened season, so one team progresses from each conference to the final. Munster look in very good shape in Conference B, but in Conference A, Ulster lead Leinster now by 10 points. It must be stressed they have played 2 games more than Leinster, but it's Leinster, Ulster, this Friday night in Dublin, 7:35. It is that rare thing, Rory, a Pro 14 regular season game with loads on the line.
Yeah, and it's great, isn't it? It's like we I suppose, having been bemoaned it, its lack of competitiveness, we should relish the fact that we have this to look forward to, and hopefully all the tests come back negative, and both sides are able to be as strong as they can be for this week, because Leinster and Connacht were both affected last week by COVID, and Leinster particularly were fairly disjointed by the end of things, but that shouldn't take away from what Connacht were able to do. Even Conference B, if Connacht are able to produce something, back that win up with another victory over Munster this weekend at home, then Conference B is back in play as well. So we have a bit of a race for these 2 top positions. It's slightly up in the air because of COVID and the fact that the season has been curtailed to play a tournament against the South Africans and all of that later on, and if that falls by the wayside, will we go back to having a normal playoffs? I'm not sure at this stage. Certainly Connacht's coaches, Andy Friend and Jack Carty, both used the word if. It's the top team on Saturday night, which was interesting. They're obviously slightly certainly open to the idea that maybe that there will be quarterfinals and semi-finals at this stage. They're not kind of sold on the idea that it's all going to be into a final. But as it stands, there's proper jeopardy in this game on Friday. Leinster's Pro 14 title defence won't be over if they lose, but they'll be relying on results from elsewhere. And they don't lose at home very often. They don't lose in the Pro 14 very often. So we can expect to see a response. And at the same time, Ulster have a real opportunity now to, Leinster will still be without players. They have an opportunity to come to Dublin and do something special and put themselves in an incredibly strong position to win silverware, because they've always found Leinster to be the team in the final or the semi-finalists block their path, or the quarter-finalists block their path. They probably fancy themselves against Munster in a one-off game, as Munster would do in a one-off game against Ulster, if that's how it came to pass. So this is their chance against a weakened Leinster team, a wounded Leinster team, to kind of come up with something big.
Yes, and we are talking about a Leinster team now who are experiencing the massive wobble of 1 defeat in 27 in this league. So
it's a disaster, total disaster for Leinster.
2 games would be a streak, And so Rory, you might just bring us both up to date. Just how disjointed has Leinster's preparation been? So we're hearing COVID tests and then false positives, and people are tucking into their Christmas dinner and it's hard to keep track of everything. And then even pre-Christmas, like they're losing players in the front row for sure. And then you take Northampton at the RDS as an example, and Harry Byrne has to cry off before kick-off, and then even against Connacht the other week, Kieran Frawley had to cry off, and then Jonathan Sexton starts and he goes off with a HIA. So they do feel very dishevelled at the moment. How many first-teamers are they down?
It's hard to put an exact figure on it, Joe. There's the 2 positive cases, and then the couple of close contacts of people who are living with those cases. They don't name them, so we don't know exactly who they are. I have an idea, but I'd rather not. It's not in the public domain. So the build up to the Munster game. I think the statement was released on Christmas Eve at about 7 o'clock. So I think a lot of people would have missed that, understandably. But those, I think 7 or 8 players came back positive, and then on Christmas Eve they got retests done, and they were all false positives. They did testing after Christmas when they came back in on the Monday before the Connacht game, and 2 players came back positive. So that knocked out those 2 players, plus their close contacts. They also had given, as part of the IRFU player management scheme, most of their November frontliners the month or the week off. Johnny Sexton was pressed into service when Kieran Frawley tweaked his hamstring, I think it was, during the week. I presume Johnny Sexton was on a week off and got drafted in because they had no other out halves. He then got a HIA after 24 minutes of the game. Jimmy O'Brien, who slotted in for him, had already injured his shoulder and was playing hurt. He played out half at school, but isn't really a 10. You know, certainly at this level, he's no experience at 10. He struggled a bit, and then they brought in David Hawkshaw later on, who kind of got them home. They're okay up front. Their pack, like, they got beaten up in the game, so it's not really an excuse. They got beaten up in the game, and their pack is pretty much their standard Pro 14 with a couple of internationals. It's a strong pack, but you know, they had 2 debutants in the wing and fullback. Their down numbers at 10. And I think you can see from Sexton's performance that maybe he hadn't had the ideal preparation because he was nowhere near his best. So, like, no one's going to cry for that. Like, Leinster the best squad in the competition. It usually gets them by. I wouldn't. But I do think the preparation has been hit by it. So all those internationals that are fit are back this week for the Ulster game. So the excuses, whatever excuses are there, go out the window. And they should be, you know, much more reminiscent of what they normally are this weekend.
Yeah, to recap on, you know, Ulster's Pro 14 season, Keith, I mean, they've had some really big wins. They won away, when I say big, just gutsy, impressive wins. They won away in Cardiff, they won in Edinburgh, they beat Scarlets by 2 points at home. And then Christmas, under the cosh against Connacht for a huge amount of that game, they somehow managed to win. And then they beat Munster at home on Saturday in freezing temperatures. So Dan McFarland has come again with this team in year 3 after the disappointment of the Pro 14 final in particular last year. And they do seem to be building on last season.
Well, I'd say the Connacht game was the most important game for them this season. They were kind of well beaten until they took control for the last 15 or 20 minutes of the game. They were under an awful lot of pressure, and it's the manner in which they came back. I think they're short a good few players to really compete at the top table. But what they have done, and what McFarland has done, is he's built a squad that is not too many stars, but that are playing for each other. They look like a really good team. Now, I do think there was a little bit of an unbalance between the team that Munster sent up there. I thought that was a very, very almost naive team. There was a lot of young players playing with guys who hadn't played a huge amount. There was a drastic number of changes. So I still think Ulster went about their job very well, but I don't think they can get overexcited. And when we're looking at rugby at the present moment in time, we're looking at teams who are shorn of players from injury because there doesn't seem to be a consistent level of training. And like we're saying, if somebody is out for 2 weeks because of COVID, what level of training are they doing exactly? How ready are they to come into it? Because the amount of injuries that we have in all the squads at the moment is fairly incredible. But ignoring all that, Ulster are just very quietly going about doing their job, and they're actually eking out the wins at the end in a lot of cases. So I think they're shy some really, really big players for them to really contend. But in this fractured season, they have an opportunity to do something because they're playing incredibly well as a team.
Yeah, so presumably they're still right up against it against Leinster frontliners this Friday.
Yeah, I think so, but it depends. Look, I know we're only talking about one loss, and I would expect Leinster to have a proper rebound and to play far sharper. I don't know exactly what players they have at their disposal. Some of these guys haven't tasted defeat for an awful long time, and that can have two reactions to that. One can be that your confidence is down a little, and the other one can be that everything clicks and goes well. A lot depends on the weather, a lot depends on how the training has gone, because we're looking at every single game that we have, there's late changes to everything, so you never quite know what's going to happen. So it's who is it that tunes in properly for the game at hand. That's what becomes essential. So look, I fully expect Leinster to win. because their history is of winning these big games, and they're pushed into a corner at the moment, because if they lose this one, they're down quite a lot. If they win it, they're back in a really good position. It's one of those double point games because you're playing against a team that's above you. So look, I expect Leinster to do really well and win, but Ulster have grown in a level of confidence, and I just think they'll go down with confidence.
Dan McFarland, by the way, was asked, does he feel sorry in any way for Leo Cullen, given the injury situation, given the number of Leinster players who have profited elsewhere, including at Ulster. He said, "Do I feel sorry for Leo? Are you joking? He's sat amongst 10 or 12 of the wealthiest schools in the country, plying people from rich families through those schools, churning out bursaries to the best prospects. Do I feel sorry for him? That's hilarious." Slightly odd way of framing the whole situation, but I guess I take his point. Rory, I know Stockdale has a knee injury, and is it unclear if Coetzee is going to play before going home? Like, it's it's a feature of all these inter-pro matches at Christmas. With each result, you have to ask who was playing their strongest team, who wasn't. So, do we even know who's going to pitch up on Friday?
I think Ulster will be like Leinster. They'll be full strength. I think the coaches get to choose who kind of, which games they rest. The holidays are given in, and they would have rested a lot of people for that Connacht trip. Coetzee played off the bench against Munster, so you'd imagine, unless they've kind of taken the hump with them and decided that he's, they're trying to, use him as a bit part player for the rest of the season, which would be an unwise thing to do with a player of that quality, given you're still paying him. And I don't think they will do that. You would imagine he'll be starting because he's too good and too important. Stockdale, they say, isn't as serious as first feared when you see him helped off by a physio. And interestingly, Larmer's back this weekend as well, so we could have a face-off for the Ireland 15 shirt, which would be pretty interesting. So no, I think Ulster will come down. You're right. I mean, I wouldn't get too carried away with Ulster. I think they should have got a bonus point against Munster at the weekend. They should be 11 points clear, and they didn't, and they allowed a very callow yet impressive Munster team in the last 20 minutes kind of get a foothold in the game. So I wouldn't get too carried away with the way Ulster are playing at the moment. I think they control that game in Galway very well, but they're not. They still lost their 2 European games, and I think they should have been better against Munster last weekend. So they've got room for improvement as well. But they should be. Henderson is out long term, which is a big loss to their pack. But I think you'll see, your Jordy Murphys and Marty Moore and Billy Burns probably at 10 with Cooney at 9, with the 2 experienced campaigners to come off the bench, which is a pretty nice combination that Dan McFarland has. That was a really astute signing when it comes to the league season, to bring in Madigan and Mathewson, who can run a game when the two boys are away. So yeah, I think they'll both be fairly stacked this weekend, as stacked as they can be given the injury that Keith has mentioned. Okay,
so how do you class the job McFarland's doing then, Rory?
I think he's done a good job. I think getting to a quarter-final 2 years in a row in the European Champions Cup was an achievement. They almost knocked Leinster out 2 years ago, and we're very unfortunate not to do that. That would have been a major overperformance, I think, to get to a semi-final and maybe beyond. It's a bit of a regression this year to go out in the first round we expected to go out in the pool stages now, having lost their games. That's pretty disappointing. But if they can get a good Pro 14 showing, I think he's done a good job. I think all of the other provinces face a very difficult precipice at the moment as they try and haul in Leinster, who have all the natural advantages that Leinster have, as well as the excellent coaching, good leadership, and just great setup that Leinster have at the moment. Munster are going about it very well, and I think Ulster have gone about it pretty well as well. I think they're maybe levelling off a little bit this year and losing, how they replace Coetzee will be very interesting to see. But I don't think you can fault McFarland and what he's done. And I think all 4 provinces are performing reasonably well at the moment, which is a pretty strong place to be, considering what is happening in Wales and Scotland in particular.
Yeah. So on to Connacht then, Keith. 35 points to 24 against Leinster. We were talking about it to Ron O'Gara, obviously, on Monday as well. I think everybody enjoyed their performance on a whole host of levels. And the other thing, Keith, is it really transforms what could have been turning into a sticky period for them. So they lost to Racing, understandably, in Paris, and had a real go in the second half. They were poor against Bristol by their own admission. They lose to Ulster when they really shouldn't. And then this game at the RDS comes along. So if, for a moment, hypothetically, they'd lost that, which you would have expected, that's 4 losses on the bounce. Munster to come at the sports ground, followed by Bristol away and Racing away, or Racing in Galway, rather. Like, they could have, conceivably, if heads had dropped, be staring 6 defeats in a row here until the Dragons were in town on February 2nd. So you really can't underestimate what that win in the RDS has done. I mean, suddenly they're back in Champions Cup contention in the Pro 14 again. Yeah,
well, look, I think if you look at the teams that they're playing, they are a huge step up from Connacht. You know, Bristol are a moneybags team. Racing is a moneybags team. They have stardust all over it, but also they have coaching setups that try and make those teams work as teams, not just as Galacticos. And I think they've played really, really well. Connacht are outgunned in all those. And look, we've said this for years, that every time we get a chance to watch Connacht play and play in one of those big games, it's the fact that they don't seem to have any fear. And I know they can lose a couple of matches, of course they do. They equally don't have the strength and depth in their squad, but it's their ability to perform and to play the ball and to attack almost at all times. Look, I still think they're a breath of fresh air. I think in many respects I'd like rugby to be more about that than it is about the pick and goes and elements of that. And I think they could have been on a sticky wicket to confuse sporting metaphors, but you know, they dug out a victory. They have an ability to win, and look, I go back to the Pat Lam era. What I felt he gave them, pretty much because there's such a low level of expectation for them, and Connacht would be offended by that idea, but because of the limited resources, or because of the kind of left on the hind teat for a long time in Irish rugby, they have that a lower level of expectation, a little bit of bitterness, which is great, but they seem to have no fear. For me, they still are one of the best teams to watch because, and they have an ability to do anything. And, you know, I think we're at an incredibly unusual nexus in rugby as to what happens. Rory touched on it there a little bit. The Irish provinces are doing incredibly well in incredibly difficult circumstances. Yeah. We don't quite know what's going to happen with the Pro 14 or Pro 16, how some of the other clubs in the other countries are going to survive. The RFU have been incredibly tight with its money and yet been prudent with its money. And it's a very difficult time for the sport. And yet all our teams are pretty much at the top of the tree in the league where they're supposed to be. And in the Heineken Cup, you know, some of the teams are doing okay. I think we get a really big pass mark for an awful lot of things that have happened, because, like, could you imagine the level of confusion that goes on in every single team room or CEO's office when who do we have? Oh my God, we've more tests today. What's that going to throw up? Have we an injury list? Exactly how are we going to put the team together? Can you imagine the pressure the coaches are under? And I think they're doing a pretty decent job.
Yeah. Much of the focus, Rory, has been on Jack Carty after that game at 25-point haul. He's done some very interesting interviews. He was on the AM show with the lads on Monday, talked about his improvements from a psychological perspective almost as much as anything. You know, this is a guy who Joe Schmidt deemed good enough to go to the World Cup. As we know, that wasn't an act of charity. He really saw something in Carty, and if you hit pause 20 minutes into that Japan game, you'd be saying, well, hey, this guy can really do it. And there was an inevitable downturn. Who knows what impact the World Cup disappointment had on him, but it was considerable. Where is he in terms of the consistency of his performances? Everybody would have watched the Leinster game and said, right, okay, that is talent. And, you know, the kicking game jumps out a mile as something that could really do damage, even at international level. But so Carty's 3 and 4 out of 10 performances by his standards, where, like, how often are they cropping up? And give us a sense of his form line over the last 4, 5, 6 months. I know he thought he played very well against Racing as well, he was saying to the lads.
Yeah, I think he's in a vein of form right now, but I think even Andy Friend in the aftermath said that Jack's had a really tough year. And I think the way he took, a little bit like Ian Madigan 4 years beforehand, I think he took quite a substantial amount of the in-house blame for that Japan result and Ireland's World Cup campaign going awry. And he wasn't really seen after that, you know, and I think that hit him hard, as it would any player. And I do think, you know, he's spoken quite openly about how he has struggled with external criticism, but to deal with kind of those video reviews and all that sort of stuff, having not really been, like Enda McNulty made the point in the aftermath of the World Cup that Jack Carty never really got a run at 10, a fair run at 10 before the World Cup. He was never really given a chance to show what he could do or to build into the team, and then suddenly he was being asked to run the team against Japan in a really important pool game. I think it had a massive impact. I think it put him off the rails for a little bit in terms of his performances. He lost his place for a little while. He was in and out of the team. He had some good moments and some bad moments, and then he lost his Ireland place, and that's got to hurt as well. So he's gone from the starting 10 in a World Cup pool game of importance to missing out on the Six Nations. He was good enough to get back in for the tail end of the Six Nations. He was over in Paris as the 24th man, and then Andy Farrell dropped him again for the November series, the Autumn Nations Cup, and brought in Billy Burns. And I think his response to that has been really impressive. I think he's been building nicely. I think he is a player who does tend to perform in slightly streaky runs of form, maybe a little like Shane Long in football, but when he's hot, he's really, really hot. And I think his form makes it very, very difficult for Andy Farrell to ignore him now, particularly because Ross Byrne's not playing and didn't have a particularly impressive autumn. I think Billy Burns is probably second choice right now on Andy Farrell's head. And I think Carty does a lot of the things that Burns does really well. He's very clever, he's very astute, he's a good kicker of the ball, he runs the game very well. He's a bit of a leader. I mean, the way he contributed twice to his own try, and the way he powered over from close range, I thought was, showed a different side of things. So I think he's the kind of player that when he's hot, you gotta back him and go with him. It doesn't go so well once that falls off, and maybe that's why he's fallen down at international level, or hasn't quite had the trust of coaches. But I think right now he's in a really rich vein of form, and long may it continue. I
was looking, Keith, at his consistency off the tee as a starting point. If you're going to pick number 10 at test level for a start, you look at that. And so Sexton is somewhere in the high 70s percentage-wise. Carty last season was at about 68, 69%. So that's a bridge or a gap which needs to be bridged for starters. On Rory's point of a streaky player, Keith, when they're hot, and like, geez, when you see the little banana kick outside of the boot kicks that Carty throws in behind a fairly bemused Dave Kearney, you think, geez, at any level, right up to test level, that kind of variety in a kicking game is a really useful weapon. So, but the implication is when he's not hot, it's just not a good enough baseline for test level. Is that the issue with Carty?
Well, you've nailed even the phraseology on that, Joe. The idea is when he's not playing well, what's his standard? And is his standard 7 out of 10? Because that's what you have to be as an out half, as your bad standard. And you want to get up to 9 out of 10 when you're on that streaky run. So he has to build up the things he doesn't have to think about. He has to build up that sense of confidence in his own ability, so that when things aren't going well, he needs to know what he has to do to get back on track. So some of that's psychological, some of that is the players around him. Like if we go back to the Japan game, to lay the blame at Jack Carthy's feet for a young guy with very little international, he's not young, but with very little international experience, that's very poor. You can't lay it just at his feet, and you lay it at the senior players who are part of the team. And you need to have things, and you need to have a game plan that when a guy's confidence is dropping, you make certain things be really simple around him. And that becomes, so you have a 12 who takes the ball up into contact. You don't come back deep, push up onto the line. I'll take the hit, I'll take the pressure. That's what you're trying to have on the team, and that didn't happen. So he had a fairly big fall. It's a huge credit to him to be able to come back and play at that performance and kick as well. So the idea is that he doesn't need to kick 25 points the next time. But it'd be really good if he was 7 out of 10 kicks or 8 out of 10 kicks. If he gets up to 60 or 70, 75%, 80% for his kicking, that's what he needs to be able to do. They're not totally linked, but an awful lot of this is to do with confidence. And for 10, you don't want the streak. That's the problem. If he's getting very streaky in a really good way, you then want him to fall back to a very high level. He can't fall all the way back because he is the quarterback for the team, and you want to have a level of trust in the team in him. Not is he going to be great today or bad today. What you want him to be is great today or very good. That's the step up for international rugby, especially at 10.
Yeah, because I mean, geez, even the way he managed the game against Leinster once they were in front was very good. You know, he turned them around and kept things ticking over very nicely. That's interesting, by the way, brief tangent, because there are other things I need to talk to you about, Rory. That's interesting you heard that he was given a fair portion of the blame in-house after the World Cup. Geez, I mean, we throw Ross Byrne to the wolves at Twickenham, and then post-World Cup we decide to, you know, give Jack Carty a kick as well. If you wouldn't want to be a young, vulnerable number 10 in that Irish setup.
No, I don't think like you're being compared with Johnny Sexton, you know. I mean, and that's the standard that's being set. That the main, you know, he wasn't the captain of the team back then, but he was the main leader in the team. And you're coming in and you're trying to replace the general, and everything went through Johnny. Not to relitigate the Joe Schmidt era once again, but everything went through Johnny at the time, and not enough time was put into investing time into the kind of younger alternatives. I think Joey Carberry probably did get a fair bit of time, and unfortunately his injury opened the things up for Jack Carty. But it's a lesson I think that Andy Farrell needs to heed as he goes about the next 3 years, is not to to have too much eggs in one basket in that kind of way, and to, you know, I think the 10s and 9s often take the heat for, you know, a poor pack performance because they're operating on poor ball. I mean, Jack Hardy was given an armchair ride by his pack at the weekend. They won every collision, and that helped him as well. You know, he was getting good ball. The defense was on the back foot, so he had an extra second to play with, and that, you know, he's a good player. On, you know, when he has that extra second, he's going to make use of it. So yeah, no, I think it's an interesting one. I think 10 always takes either a lot of the credit or a lot of the blame, a little bit like the quarterback, and yeah, sometimes disproportionately so, I suppose. Yeah.
So and by the way, Roy, just on Andy Friend and the business he has done and where Connacht are, like Keith talked about the expectations on them being, you know, the perennial issue when it comes to Connacht. I was having a glance at the signings this year because, you know, they don't have the resources of other provinces. So from Munster, they took Sammy Arnold, Alex Wooten and Conor Oliver. From Leinster, they took Jack Ainger and Oisin Dowling, who's just come back from injury, and they promoted 6 of their own players from the academy as well. And then Andy Friend was talking about 2 signings from Australian sevens. John Porch last year, now doing very well at fullback, and Ben O'Donnell as well, who got his debut at the RDS. So Friend was saying of those Australian players, I keep saying to people, it's a bit like shopping in Aldi as opposed to Brown Thomas. We shop in Aldi because in the sevens market, you pick them up pretty cheap. Then all of a sudden on the big stage, other people work out just how good they are. That all seems like he's done pretty reasonable business, Andy Friend.
Yeah, the other signing they have is Abraham Papali'i, who's that massive ball carrier in the kind of Nick Williams style from Bay of Plenty, who they signed but keeps getting himself sent off. But he again was a money ball signing. They crunched the numbers and found a guy who was undervalued in terms of what he could offer to the team, and that's what they're having to do. Connacht let go, I think, was 12 players last summer, and when you look through the list of names, there were some really surprising ones like Nii Adeolokun, who's now playing for Bristol, Owen McKeown, kind of retired soon afterwards, and there was a couple of others as well. Turned out that David Nusafora kind of said to Friend, I have a few lads I can get you in from the other provinces, but you need to move some of these kind of players who are not going to make it for Ireland or who are kind of, you know, squad players off your books. So he did that. Then Nusafora got onto helped persuade these young or kind of underused players from other provinces, and it's worked out quite well for them. I mean, the Sammy Arnold and Conor Oliver, 2 eggs, you know, who both left Munster for opportunity. They were 2 of their best players last weekend. Tom Daly, a player, was released a couple of years ago by Leinster, having been on loan at Connacht, was exceptional as well. Alex Wotton's been really good. I mean, Alex Wotton started a European semi-final for Leinster ahead of Simon Zebo a couple of seasons ago, and then he found himself out of favour pretty much straight away afterwards because it didn't go too well for him. But he's obviously a very good player. So, no, he is operating a very different model to all of the other provinces. They train in a much worse facility to all the other provinces. Their stadium is not yet, you know, commenced. The work in their stadium hasn't yet commenced. He's doing a very good job, I think, and he's a very astute, a very calm and measured coach, and you can tell from the way his players talk about him that they really, really like him and really, really respect for him, and you can see by the way they play that they play for him as well. There's a lot to like about what Connacht are doing. I don't know if they're like the conditions that kind of led to that 2016 league win. That was a pretty unique season. I'm not sure how realistic it is that he can ever guide them to that level. But for them to be a consistent force and be able to take down Leinster and compete in the Champions Cup and all of that, it considering where they're coming from and what they're dealing with, I think is pretty impressive.
Yeah, it's always tricky to know what marks a successful year for Connacht because of that very context you've outlined. And then briefly, Keith, Conference B. So Munster, as I mentioned, are in control at the moment, 33 points to Connacht's 25. They play at the Sports Ground Saturday, 7:35. Based on that team that was sent to Ulster, are we presuming Munster will go as fully loaded as possible, Keith, to stamp their authority on Conference B and all but confirm the final?
I think so. I think that's something that they need to do. I was surprised with the team that was sent to Ulster. I'm always a fan of the younger guys getting a run, but when you put them all in together at once, it's very hard to gel. But again, we're looking at coaches trying to divvy up what they do depending on Ireland's call of players and a decent level of rotation. So you I'm complaining on one hand and not complaining on the other. But I would expect to see a very strong team going up because, again, if you get the chance and the opportunity for a double point game like this one is, if you get that big result if Munster get it, they put themselves in an incredibly strong position. And that's what they want to try and do because they want to be able to concentrate on two competitions, and that becomes very important for them. So if they were to lose this weekend, I think that just brings things an awful lot closer and makes things a bit edgy and affects selections that you can have for some of the matches later on in the year.
Okay. Well, it seems like we're happy enough with the progress of all the Irish provinces at the moment. Lions 2021. So where we are here is that, Keith, the Lions MD, Ben Cavalier, said on Saturday, final decision due next month. So they're going to make a final decision next month. I suspect things will not be all that much more clearer in terms of where the world is with regards to COVID by next month, but they're making their decision then. PA, the press agency, are citing 3 contingency plans being discussed currently. So number 1, postponement to 2022, and there go all the tours planned for next year, including Ireland down to New Zealand. Another option is stick with the current itinerary in South Africa, but behind closed doors, or then contingency plan number 3, play it in Ireland and the UK, and hopefully, unlike in South Africa, with crowds, that the vaccine is starting to take effect and maybe there's a 1 metre difference and you can get 20,000 into a Croke Park or Twickenham or wherever. Tom English, before I get your thoughts on that, Keith, was on OTB AM this morning. He was mentioning the possibility of the Croke Park contingency.
I spoke to a number of people who are very familiar with the negotiations and the discussions the other day. Said the number 1 contingency plan right now is to move South Africa here, to have the exact same schedule, but to move it to the UK and Ireland. And now that might change, but as it was laid out to me, is you'd have the exact same tour and you'd have test matches, possibly the Principality, Twickenham, and Wembley. Now, Wembley kind of took me by surprise. I suspect that they don't want to say Croke Park because they get ahead of themselves and they don't want to upset the GAA. And I would imagine this is it's in its infancy in terms of planning. But Croke Park, would have to imagine, would be on the agenda. They would pop the question if they get to that point. They can't. The sense that I get, what they were ruling out was delaying it till 2022. They seem to be dead set against that now. But a UK and Ireland tour is predicated on crowds, some crowds, maybe not all crowds, but some crowds. So that's where they're at the moment, it seems.
Tom English there on OTB AM, full interview in all the usual places. So, Keith, and they are contingency plans. There is obviously still the possibility, although it feels remote, of the tour as it stands with bucket loads of fans travelling down to South Africa. I think at this point we can just rule that one out.
Yeah, I mean, if we put aside all the caveats that we're not medical experts, right, or policy experts, which we're not, a tour to South Africa seems incredibly unlikely. And yet, for South African Rugby Union, for 30 or 40,000 British and Irish supporters to travel down there is what makes the tour so incredibly valuable financially. Not just the spend in the stadia, but also the spend in the economy. But pretty much each of the Southern Hemisphere unions get put into the black on the back of a Lions tour. So they get a tour every 12 years, and it puts them into the black and puts them into a strong position. And it's part of their way of divvying up fees for Ireland playing, we'll say, South Africa in Dublin. Ireland get all the fees, South Africa get none. Because they say, well, you get the fees when it goes down to to South Africa for the Lions. That's what happens. So it's a big money game. The Croke Park part of it, look, Tom English gave a perfect answer that they didn't mention Croke Park because they want to make certain that they have that squared away before they do it. That's a fair comment. You would want it in the biggest stadium possible. If fans are allowed in, you will have no issue selling tickets hand over fist over for it during the summer. I think pushing it off to next year is an absolute no-no. I feel the year prior to a World Cup year is one where you're trying to get your national team right and sorted for the World Cup. It could be factored in for after the World Cup. You could end up having 2 Lions tours in 3 or 4 years. That has definitely happened in the past. They used to come far more thick and fast in the 50s and 60s. So those things do happen and can happen. But I think it is just a colossal amount of guessing at the present moment in time.
What would interest you more? A trip down to South Africa, just the players on the plane, matches behind closed doors?
That won't happen.
Why won't that happen?
That won't happen because of the finances.
Okay, so if I took finances out of it for a second, which is obviously a pointless exercise, but would you prefer to, if you were as a fan on your armchair, I suppose, would you prefer to watch the players in South Africa behind closed doors, or South Africa coming up and playing in the likes of Croke Park with 10, 20,000 there, just as a sporting spectacle for a second?
Yeah, as a spectacle, the more we've watched of sport over the last few months, sport needs fans. They need the fans in the ground. And we understand why they're playing, and we understand the rights and the money and everything that's needed for it. But for a game to have huge significance, for me, you need a full stadium. That's what's required. Equally well, I think we are putting our players' welfare in huge difficulty. Peaks and troughs in the season. They're being pulled from one competition to the next. They're trying to squeeze an extra bit of a competition in to keep the finances alive. It's understandable why, but I think it becomes incredibly difficult to get this Lions tour fully underway, be it down in South Africa or up here. What would I rather? I think the Lions is a touring side. That's what it was built around. I'm not even a fan of having a match prior to going, which I know that the plan is for a game against Japan, and I still am I'm properly upset for the fact that we can't get the leagues to be able to finish in time for a 1 in a 4 year period of time where the Lions can have a proper run in, and that doesn't happen irrespective of COVID. So I don't know what the solution is, and actually they're all there given as options, but whichever one it is, it will be a poor substitute to what the Lions are. And I do think you need to protect what the Lions is as a brand, and you need to be able to have it sorted within an international calendar, and that just hasn't been done.
Yeah, it certainly, Rory, feels like we're looking at poor substitute. That much is guaranteed. What are you hearing? What are you thinking? Yeah,
well, the best idea I saw was Tour de France, just rip it up and go to France and play Toulouse, Toulon, Lyon, head to Lyon, La Rochelle, and do the exact same thing in France. But obviously for contractual reasons, that's unlikely to happen. But a 3-test series against France on a tour, I think, could capture the imagination. But unfortunately, I think it's probably beyond the administrators who are locked into a whole load of things. It does sound like the UK and Ireland, or UK and Ireland based tour is gathering momentum, and whether that sees a game here, I don't know yet. I mean, it makes sense that that you try and have a game in all of the 4 participating teams, and you could see how they could sell that as, I'm with Keith on it's a touring side. It wouldn't be the same. But at the same time, it's an exceptional year, it's exceptional circumstances, and it could be billed as a celebration of rugby, of crowds coming back, and you have 1 million South Africans in London at least, and plenty live here as well. Like you would guess, a nice mix in the stadiums. You will be able to sell it as, come and see a once in a lifetime chance to see the Lions play a test series in the UK and Ireland. It's not ideal, but nothing is ideal at the moment. I'd like to see the Springboks go on tour as well. If there's going to be warm up games and build up games, like why not have the Springboks playing Thomond Park and Kingspan and Gloucester and Leicester, and make it kind of the two of them crisscrossing around the UK and kind of building towards it. I think that could be really exciting. But I mean, like you're relying on vaccination rates increasing at a whole other level. There's a lot of they're making decisions. I think in a very optimistic, even that they're very optimistic that we will have crowds by then. I saw the Irish Times reported that, or if you don't think they'll have full houses, in 2021. So like, if it's 20,000 people in Croke Park, does that make sense? I think Philip Brown said they need to have 18,000 in to make any financial sense in the Aviva. So, I'm pretty sure the Croke Park would afford them the opportunity, but they charge them a reasonable price to do so, as is their prerogative. It's got to make financial sense, and I think there's a lot of water to go under the bridge.
I only think Croke Park works if it's 82,500.
Oh, there's no chance. There's no chance of that.
No.
There just isn't. And it's such a treacherous decision-making process, because they could say, well, let's operate on the basis of 30,000 fans, and then a month before the government can say, actually, that's behind closed doors. And suddenly you're playing a Lions test behind closed doors in Dublin for no obvious reason, as opposed to Cape Town. So,
I
don't
know.
know.
It's incredibly difficult. Who'd want to be an administrator? Much as we slag them off from time to time, it's very, very tough. And we'll discuss this again, but with the longer this goes on, it puts a lot of the sport in jeopardy.
It does. And by the way, just to finish up on an equally negative point, I heard Bernard Jackman on the RTE Rugby podcast, Rory, and he was saying he's talking to people over in France, and already there's grumblings there about the Champions Cup. Plenty of French teams already out of contention in the knockout stages. They're as unimpressed with this UK variant as we all are, and they're thinking to themselves, why, with important top 14 action to come, would we travel over to, well, take your pick of any number of English sides? So I think the Champions Cup could be getting a few emails from fans that they may not like all of a sudden.
Oh, I think everyone needs to enjoy these two Pro 14 games at the weekend, because the Champions Cup schedule, I think, will be fairly damaged in the next 2 weeks. I think Northampton Saints have already called off their game this weekend, and they're supposed to be coming to Dublin on Friday week to play Leinster. They're out of contention really in the Champions Cup at this stage. If you're out of contention, if you have a couple of cases, if you're worried, they have changed their testing procedures to kind of satisfy the top 14 clubs. They brought it in line. They brought it closer to kickoff. So before you fly, you're tested and you have your results back. And if you have any, that basically the games are called off. So you don't have a team with an outbreak subsequently informing the team they play that they have to isolate for 2 weeks, which has kind of cost teams points and had games cancelled. And we're seeing, I think, Derby County in football.
I was just going to say, sorry to interrupt. It's teetering. So the Premier League, which are doing 2 tests on every player each week, as suddenly they've gone from, on average, it was 6 cases a week, 7 cases a week, 10 on occasion, to be fair, and there was 14 1 week. But the last 2 weeks, it's gone from 6 and 7 to 18, and now the Premier League have announced today 40 in a week. So, I mean, pretty soon the word exponential is going to be used, and there's no more well-resourced bubble than the Premier League.
That's it. I mean,
they've huge resources. All these things cost a huge amount of money. Once you start multiplying them to 40 players or 50 people in a squad, and you're doing it twice a week, and there's no money coming in.
Yeah.
You can do that when you have billionaire backers, or you are in Premier League, where the amounts of monies that come through for rights are colossal. But even then, they're under pressure.
Okay, gents, not the cheeriest of ways to sign off, but that's where we are. Keith Wood, thank you, and Rory O'Connor of the Irish Independent, as ever. Thanks, gents.
Thanks, lads.
Cheers.
Wednesday night rugby on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, official sponsors of the Irish rugby team. Team of us, everyone in.